This is a communication I was requested to make today. And I'll make it to the last full stop. I'll make it to the last full stop. I'll make it to the last full stop. You are the founder, Senator. Deputy Minority Leader, you are the founder. I'm on the seat and you cannot pretend.
Okay, I just want to know what happened. Like, this is the part where you tell us exactly what happened, Francis. I'm not even going to purport to start talking. What was going on at the Senate this week? Actually, it even started last week, didn't it?
Last week.
Yeah, but this week was like...
culmination.
Yeah. The peak, crazy. The climax, the... All right. What happened?
Now, this is what happened. You remember the team of Jubilee MPs
that went to
who went to State House?
Yep.
32 of them. Among them was Fatma Dulo. Fatma Dulo is the minority whip in the Senate. Mm-hmm. So after that trip, there are two members of parliament who are targeted, who are part of that delegation. One is Fatma Dulo, the Senate minority whip, and Sabina Chege, the deputy minority whip in the National Assembly.
Yep.
Sabina's case is yet to be to trigger debate in the National Assembly. Probably it will next week or thereabout. Let's wait for that. But in the meantime, in the Senate, the Azimio senators felt that the Isiolo senator could no longer serve the interests of the minority team as the whip, now that she has already said she will work with the government. Mm-hmm. And for purposes of development and going on. So they went and met, the Azimio senators went for a parliamentary group meeting and met Raila Odinga, the Azimio team leader. And during that meeting, the senators resolved to have a change of guard or change their leadership in the House. And actually, the changes were communicated and were announced by the Azimio leader, and these were the announcements. Just listen to the announcements, because this is what triggered the altercations that you've seen in the Senate.
Once the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country and of those whose interests.
The minority leader is Honorable Stuart Mazayo, deputed by Honorable Senator Enoch Wambua from Kitui, and the whip is Honorable Ledama Olekina, deputized by Honorable Edwin Sifuna. And that is our lineup in the Senate. This is because some officials who were there before have opted to now work with the majority party in the Senate.
Correct. That is exactly what triggered the discussion. So once those changes were made, they were to be communicated formally to the Speaker of the Senate to effect the changes. All that is required is, number one, the minutes of that parliamentary group meeting and the lists of the officials or the leadership of the House. And so when that was taken to the Speaker of the Senate, Amason Kingi, the majority team defended Fatma Dulo, obviously, as would have been expected. And so the Azimio team felt that the Speaker was taking sides in this debate, which they thought was a pretty simple and straightforward matter. This is the leadership of the minority team in the Senate, so just effect it and recognize it as it was. And so what else happened? The Isiolo senator, the Senate minority whip, went to the Political Parties Dispute Tribunal, PPDT, and obtained orders to stay the change of guard. And so the Azimio senators are arguing a matter that is live in the Senate should not be canvassed in a court of law, because the tribunal also has the same powers as a magistrate's court. And so they argue that since the matter is live in the Senate, it should not have found its way into the Senate. And so they have been demanding communication from the chair to confirm that the change of guard has been effected. And every time that the Speaker does not say what they want to hear, they bring the drama like we saw last week and the course of this week. Of course, the culmination was yesterday, which was quite an ugly altercation. For the very first time I saw in that Senate, where the Speaker is speaking and the minority team is heckling the speaker, making it impossible for him to talk. And on the other side, you hear, name calling and so on and so forth, which is quite an ugly scene. Yesterday, the speaker sent out of the House 4 senators, Olekina, Mazayo, Eno Kwambua, and Eddie Okech, the senator for Migori. And then after a break of about 30 minutes, he came back to the House and decided to undo what he had done. Of course, there is no standing order that allows the speaker to forgive a member who has been sent away. But standing order number 1 also allows the speaker to make decisions when a certain matter is not clearly and strictly provided for in the standing order. So that is the debate as it is. Yeah. That is where we are.
And even if the minority party wants to make changes in its leadership, it has the prerogative to do so. And it has happened in the past where we've had leaders being replaced. Remember when former Senator, current CS Kipchumba Murkomen, was removed as majority leader in the last parliament and was replaced by Pogisho. And then now Nakuru Governor Susan Kika Kimani was removed as majority whip. She was replaced by Rungu Kangata. And then later on, Kimani Wamatangi, it happened. And then also there was a time when the current CS for Interior was Deputy Speaker Kithure Kindiki was voted out as Deputy Speaker by the Senate. So it has happened before, and there are procedures to be followed. So if the minority party wants to make changes in its leadership in the House, they have the prerogative to do so. As I said, the work is just to inform the Speaker and make sure that correct procedure was followed. Gashuri spoke about, yes, you need to have the minutes, you need to show who was there. You need to make sure that, well, did they meet? Yes, they did. And they decided. Were there minutes? Yes. Was there a quorum? Yes. Was the speaker notified? Yes. Was Fatma Dulo informed? Yes. If all that was followed, the decision should have been made a long time ago. As Gashuri said, Dulo is being protected by the majority because, of course, she was among those members of parliament who went to State House. Yeah. But what purpose would she serve if it seems like she's probably going to cross the aisle and join the other side if she remains in that position? There was no consultation with the majority and the House when they were picking the leaders, the minority whip and the minority leader in the parliament.
Same for the majority, right?
For the majority. So there should not be that consultation now that we decided we want to make changes because of the fact that we believe that you're no longer loyal to the party.
Okay, and there's something you've talked about, the history. We'll come back to that in a moment. But I just want to, Gashuri, you talked about that moment in the House now when the Deputy Speaker is now saying everybody's out of order, he's throwing people out and perhaps rethinking that decision. I just want us to listen to that. And then we'll come back and talk about, we have been here before, as Jamila has pointed out, and say, okay, so what's happening? This is history repeating itself. It's payback and something that is seemingly becoming the norm in this country. Let's listen to the Deputy Speaker on both counts.
To standing under 122. 2. The following senators out of the chamber for the next 3 days. For the next 3 days. Senator Wambua, Enoch, the minority leader, Senator Mazayo, Senator Rendamo Olekina, and Senator Enoch. I order you out of the chamber. It is clear that the scope of the order extends to the position of the Senate Minority Whip and members of Jubilee Party of Kenya.
So I'd really like to get the permission of the now Speaker of the National Assembly, Moses Wetangula, to use his phrase, because I understand he's,
copyrighted,
he's copyrighted it.
Well, only
does that sound like what we remember? Noisy, messy, and with casualties? Linus, we've been here before. Jamila reminded us when it was Kipchumba Murkomen who was the majority leader in the Senate. We had Kithure Kindiki, who was Deputy Speaker. We've seen all of these things happening, and we're seeing it happening, and much in the same fashion, that, you know, you have the Speaker who might delay making or effecting certain changes. I mean, you know, here we are again.
Yeah, we're here, and this Senate has picked it up exactly where the last Senate left it. This Senate, just like the previous one, is the playground of the executive. Games start at State House, games start at the headquarters of Raila Odinga's campaign, and that is where the influence of what goes on in there continues. So this is the unfortunate thing, we must admit, that the Senate really remains a playground of the executive. What we saw there are not independent senators. These are not senators that are acting in their own free will. This is also a continuation of the ongoing battles between President William Ruto and opposition leader Raila Odinga. It is extended to the floor of the House. Just like the previous Senate, where we had fights between President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga on one hand, and Deputy President then William Ruto at the time. And this also went to the ground. This is why I say the Senate, unfortunately, is the playground of the executive. And here is one thing that is also really, really glaring. We don't see leadership. Where is Speaker Kingi? Where is the Speaker of the House, Emerson Kingi? Is he stamping his authority in the House? Should he have been away on a day like yesterday? Maybe Francis is
actually the whole of the week.
The whole of it's not been around. Look at that, and it shows that the House also lacks leadership, and the inexperience of the Deputy Speaker also showed. You know, when he went into this shouting match with the opposition senators, so there is something missing in the new Senate, and the first thing is leadership. We have not yet felt the hand of Speaker Emerson Kingi. We're not feeling his jurisprudence in terms of setting the rules in the House. There is something memorable about both former Speaker
Ken Lusaka
and Ekwe Thuro. Both of them, you know, you could see ownership of that seat. They were in charge of the House. This House looks unattended to. This House looks like it is on its own. And this House looks like it's running from other places and not the seat of the Speaker. And that is something really, really unfortunate. And then again, it goes to the general problem of lack of growth of our institutions. This is a delay on the part of Senate. By now, the Senate is supposed to be now on its third term, a very strong House that counterchecks State House, almost in equal strength. The Speaker is supposed to be someone the President would look up to for advice, for guidance and direction. But can he right now? Did you see anything that looks like leadership today on that floor of the House? And lastly, we are seeing senators, and let's call them parliamentarians, who have not fully appreciated that the legislative arm is actually supposed to be independent, and that their standing orders are sacred. Their way of conducting business is actually internal. It's a ritual. It's something very, very, can I call it sacred? That even when the President comes, and remember, the President comes to address the House upon invitation by the...
actually, upon request.
Yes, he requests.
Yeah, he requests to come and address the nation from the House.
Yes. Look at this. Does he need to request? He just needs to walk in, basically. They are followers. They're not leaders. And what we have seen in the last 1 week, really, is something regrettable, that we are not growing, we are not appreciating the minority-majority divide, what the role of minority is and what the role of minority is. You've seen the scramble for the leadership of the minority by the majority and the minority. It's a mess, and it's something that should be found regrettable and part of processes that are delaying maturity of our democracy. Because it's something really, really positive if we can have a parliament, and by parliament I mean both the National Assembly and the Senate, that appreciates its place, a place that can be looked at in the same way Americans, for example, regard the Congress. There's leadership coming out of the Senate, there's leadership coming out of the House of Representatives. Here, we have a place that's reliant on State House. Because this Senate, let's spare the National Assembly for now because we haven't seen much, but this Senate, for sure, is being run from other places other than the seat of the Speaker.
Yvonne, look at it this way. My disappointment is that, first, as a journalist, and secondly, as a citizen and an admirer of the Senate, the last two houses, 2013, 2017, 2017, 2022. Comparatively, I would say the Senate did a better job than the National Assembly in terms of quality and even conduct. I would even go a step ahead and say, even in terms of the personnel in the two chambers of the Senate, in the previous two houses. Look at it this way. The matter that has triggered that kind of an altercation in the Senate, in my view, is a very small matter. Very, very small matter.
Yeah.
I mean, compare the quarrel over a minority whip to the issue that was in the National Assembly when the House was immediately inaugurated. You remember the crisis of who is majority, who is minority?
Right.
You remember the game of numbers there? You remember even the question of where do the parties that were previously members of Azimio, where do they belong to when the numbers are counted at that particular time? You remember that is the debate that was so huge in such a way that it potentially could paralyze operations in the National Assembly. Even though we knew very well that Moses Wetangula, a former speaker, a former senator, now Speaker of the National Assembly, is a principal in the Kenya Kwanza team. But his decision, his communication on the majority-minority matter in the National Assembly, though some members disagreed with, respected it. And you didn't see quarrels in the National Assembly. And the National Assembly has more members than the Senate, 349 compared to 67. Imagine if Kingi was the Speaker in the National Assembly. If you're unable to manage a small number of 67 over a small matter like who is minority whip, who is not, how would that matter have been navigated of who is majority, who is minority, and probably with more members and more numbers to take control of? So it boils down to one thing, and 100% agree with LK, leadership. This is now an opportunity for Speaker Kingi to take charge, show leadership, guide the House, because this is a matter that ought to have been dealt with almost immediately. The whole week, the Senate has wasted precious
and this week
parliamentary time discussing things that have no relationship whatsoever to what the senators are supposed to be doing in that House.
But again, honestly, what else would they have been doing?
There are many things. As we speak, imagine, as we speak now, I've heard governors complain that they have not received money for the last 4 months or thereabout. I wish we had a serious and robust discussion in the Senate about that matter, but not who is minority, who is not majority, who is minority whip and who is...
Right. And again, it's back to my point about, the level of discourse and the content of it in our political spheres. It's rather interesting, the things that they choose to focus on. But listen, we're talking about leadership at the Senate. There's also leadership of some kind, of the CAS kind, and there is... Watu wanatafuta kazi bwana.
Wanatafuta.
Hakuna kazi Kenya hii. The CAS position, the court made its decision that the position, was legal. There was public participation in its formation, and that obviously paved the way for exactly what we are seeing today. So the Public Service Commission put out a shortlist. It was a shortlist that was long with many names. And then, as has become typical fashion, Gashuri, in this country, a short list is elongated and becomes a long list, which is still a short list of all the people that sort of applied. So we had an initial list of people who'd been shortlisted for the CS position, which included journalists, five, right? Former governors.
8, actually.
Oh, were they 8?
There were
Did I not count?
9, but 4 have served 2 terms.
Oh, yes. There you go. And then there was former MPs, PSs,
former
senators, former CAS.
Yeah.
I also saw names in there of people who had actually applied for the PS position, were shortlisted, but didn't obviously make it, and are now in this list. So here we are again. I am Ajina, Jamila.
No,
who's in this short, long, short list?
No, long list, Gashuri has it here. I can let him go into details. But for me, Yvonne, I just want to say a couple of things. One, you see, the number of jobs that are available are slowly quishaing, kama ulivyosema. We already have CSs, we have PSs, we have heads of parastatals who've been appointed.
Yeah.
And there are those who...
Boards of those parastatals.
Parastatals. And there are those who've been really waiting for these CAS appointments. Of course, the delay was caused by the court order and all that. And now that it's been decided that, yes, izikazi ni halali. Remember, the CAS office was ililetwa in 2017 by President
to reward
his loyalists. Yeah. And it's actually some of those positions that are actually to reward those who supported President Ruto when he was doing his campaigns and all that. And that's what we have seen the trend is. And it's normal that when a new administration comes in, those who actually get a slice of the national cake are those who supported the administration. And the original number of those who applied for these jobs are about 5,000. Even out of the 240, probably 30 or so are the ones who are going to end up in these positions, which means a lot of them will be left out because these are really limited slots. And then now, so those who may miss out will still wait and sit and see, well, kuna kazi ingine, maybe an ambassador here or a high commissioner here or a deputy ambassador here or a board here. But all in all, not everybody will get a position, those who supported the president and his campaigns. And I keep remembering what DP Rigathi Gachagua talked about, that those who supported the president from the word go are the ones who will be given priority. Even those who supported him after he won are going to come after hao ambao walikuwa naye tangu mwanzo Yvonne. So interviews are starting on 1st of March. And after that, we'll have the 30 or so people who will be CASs. But I have one question before I let Linus and Gashuri step in. Between the time when we had the CSs appointed and sworn in and the PSs appointed and sworn in, has there been any gap in service delivery in the ministries?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
And that's a very good question to ask, especially if for a moment government was to be taken as a private company like Deputy President Gachagua says. Those are the questions that you logically ask. You say, what is the need? What is the problem that you want to fix? What is the role fit that you are looking at? So that you employ. And then what is the budget? Do you have the money to actually employ? Because this has been a very contested position, right from the days that it was brought by former President Uhuru Kenyatta. There's been an argument that, look, where does it fit? If these people are going to be in the executive, the Constitution is also very prescriptive on what constitutes the executive. There is the president, deputy president, and the cabinet. And then when you go to the Constitution, it also explains what the cabinet is. And the cabinet secretaries, it actually sets the limit at 22. And I think one of the reasons the drafters of the Constitution went for that was to try and prevent wastage. But CAS, in my view, continues to be a hangover of the old days when we had assistant ministers, where you have ministers and then now you pack the ministries again with loyalists who become assistant ministers. And assistant ministers, I remember covering them in Parliament. Some of them were really, really useful. Some were used. Some really made a career out of answering questions in the House, and they were very, very good at answering questions and representing ministers. But largely, most of their work was to represent ministers, maybe in fundraisers and other such functions. Now, we've had CAS for some time now, and if we sit here and go through who we remember from the previous list in terms of relevance in the work they did, I think credit to where it belongs, there are some of them that really used the position well, especially the Ministry of Health team. If you remember,
Dr. Mwangangi, Dr. Rashida Man.
Dr. Rashida Man, you know, they stood very, very clearly. But when you look at other ministries and people who you actually find in the list that they served as CASs, there is absolutely nothing memorable about what their time. And it was not their fault. It's a position whose role is not very clear because they sit between a cabinet secretary who is sometimes a technocrat. Some of them do have a political background, but mostly technocratic in their way. And then a principal secretary, that's a PS, who is the chief accounting officer in the ministry. So they sit there. I honestly, with clear conscience, wouldn't justify, but they talk of rewarding loyalists and creating their position. The arguments constitutionally have been around Article 132. You see the public service always saying that 132.4a allowed them to allows the president to create a position. But I'm not sure the Constitution was talking of such huge numbers where you basically create another
another tier of government.
Government, yes.
Yeah. I mean, and Gashuri, you know, like Jamila said, there are only so many, and the only precedent we have are, you know, the CSs that were appointed by Uhuru, who are how many?
29.
29. And how many were in the short list, the initial one?
Actually, the initial list had 5,000.
Okay.
Then it was shortlisted to 224. Then it was long-listed to 240.
So,
shortlist.
So if we were even to use, you know, the retired president's precedents, which was how many? 30?
29.
29. So there's, you know, well over still another 200 who won't get this job. I mean, we don't know what the president will choose to do. He may yet employ more than 30.
Well, certainly.
Or less than 30.
Maybe.
Or less than.
For now, we don't know the number that he will settle on.
Yeah.
But fact.
It won't be all.
He's not going to appoint 240 chief administrative secretaries. I even doubt he will appoint 100.
But what would stop him?
Even I would say what would probably stop 100 is the reality. The reality being, so how we have 21 ministries. You look at the Executive Order number 1 of 2023 that was published last month, January. It clearly outlines the structure of government. The Executive Office of the President that has the President, the Deputy President and Prime Cabinet Secretary, 21 ministries, and then the State Law Office that is headed by the Attorney General. That's it. So even if you are to say you will appoint at least one CAS per ministry, and for the ministries that are large, that have multiple state departments, maybe appoint 2, the same principle that was applied by President Ruto's predecessor, retired President Uhuru Kenyatta, those were 29. So 21 ministries for 29 CASs, it means some ministries had 2. So even if you were to argue the same principle applies now, at most maybe 30, 35 or 40, but I doubt it will even go
50
or that way to 40, whichever the case. So that means a whole 200 people who are in this list will miss out. Number one. Number two, this is also a question of chancing, you know, probability. For people who love betting, they would say this is a multi-bet for some of them. Some of the names that I've seen in that list were in the list of PSs. The shortlisted and the shortlisted list and the long-listed shortlist. Sounds like a mouthful and confusing. Some of them were also eyeing cabinet secretary positions. Some of the names that you see on that list have already been appointed into boards.
Yes.
So kwanza watoe jam.
Yeah.
So there's an elimination process that is going on even before the main elimination process by the Public Service Commission. Be it as it may, the Public Service Commission will give us a final list of these are the people that we recommend to the president to appoint as chief administrative secretaries. So a number of them will be in this list. Of course, we'll get there. Jamila asked a very fundamental question. So what is lacking in government that they are coming to fix? One thing, which is not in governance, in the government proper, but it is in the politics proper. Number one is to reward loyalty. There are people who are told, you don't go, stick here, serikali ni kubwa. You will be accommodated somewhere. This is now part of the serikali ni kubwa, you will be accommodated somewhere. One. Two, this is also to try and answer the question, mko ndani ya serikali. Si mlitupigia kura, mko ndani ya serikali. There's always this feeling that if LK is appointed as CAS or Jamila is appointed as CAS or Yvonne, the people of Kericho, the people of Kilifi, and the people of Narok are in government. So you will see a bit of that. And thirdly, it is insurance for 2027. Si mtoto wenu wako hapa na nilimpatia kazi. So basically, the CAS positions are to try and answer the political question more than the governance question. Because, I mean, there are ministers, cabinet secretaries who are in office, there are principal secretaries who are in office, then there is the whole rank and file in government, secretaries, undersecretaries, directors, to the very lowest. So government is continuing. So these CASs, all they will need to do is to come and plug the political question, not the governance and administrative question in the administration.
Yeah, and I think as we wind up, just to note that, you know, when you're hiring CASs, it's not just about them. They come with a personal assistant, they have a driver, they have, you know, so there's a whole sort of ecosystem around each position. And that ecosystem comes at an expense. Of course. So, you know, there's all of these people that must be hired. So even when we look at the value for money that we're getting, beyond just the salary of this one individual, it's to, you know, note that there is people who will work with them and in their offices, you know, who also, that money must come from somewhere. So if we can demonstrate that there is value for money, not just for this one individual, but for, you know, everything else that comes with it, you know, there's fuel expenses, there's a lot of expenses that, you know, go into just running one office and supporting one holder of that office. If we can demonstrate there's value for money, great. If not, well.
But one time, the media, through our Royal Media Services, actually went to court to ask for the interpretation of Article 34, and the institution contemplated by Article 34 of the Constitution in terms of regulation of the media, and whether that institution is the Media Council of Kenya. I'm bringing this example because sometimes down the line, maybe it will be necessary to go to the Supreme Court to seek interpretation of Article 132(4)(a) of the Constitution that reads, the President may perform any other executive function provided for in this Constitution or in the national legislation, and except otherwise provided in this Constitution, comma, may establish an office in the public service in accordance with the recommendation of the Public Service Commission. I think the country is ripe for a Supreme Court interpretation of this particular clause because, like I said earlier, what is happening now is you have the cabinet and you have CASs, which is really an extra layer. It's an entire layer that is coming into the structure that is already established by the Constitution. Is the position of CAS what was contemplated by 4A?
My simple question then, looking at the names, specifically the names, there's some ladies and gentlemen in that list, you would wonder, what are they looking for in a CAS position? Somebody who has been a governor for 2 terms, served 10 years, managed a budget of 10 billion, 12 billion, and so on and so forth. Over a period of time, let's say for 10 years, you've managed a budget of about 50, 60, 70 billion. you're looking for a CAS job, and maybe you've been in government and a PS, a director, and so on and so forth, almost 70 years old, what are you looking for in a CAS position? The initial idea was to use that position to bring up the next generation of government leaders or
young
public
people,
young leaders, you know, win them into leadership. I don't know what winning is in a 70-year-old. Of course, at the risk of being
a number, gentlemen.
Of course, at the risk of being accused of ageism. But it defeats, for me, it defeats logic that a young, energetic, innovative young person would be competing for a CAS job.
With a governor,
former governor, a former PS, a former
provincial
who has been there, done that. I mean, I think for me it's a misnomer.
Tufunge kazi.
On that misnomer.
We start with the CAS kicker today.
On my kicker tonight, the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary, Professor Njuguna Ndongo, recently advised Kenyans to prepare themselves for tough times. And late last year, through Circular Number 11 of 2022, the Treasury CS directed ministries, departments, and government agencies, MDAs, to cut down on spending as part of austerity measures aimed at saving some 300 billion shillings out of the current 2022-2023 national budget. The CS even went on to specify the areas where spending should be cut. Paragraph 9 of the circular listed travel, seminars, consultancies, legal expenses, overtime payouts as some of the costs state corporations must scale down to the bare minimum. Paragraph 14 of the circular guided state corporations on controlling expenditure with a reminder on the approval process that should involve the National Treasury and a warning to chief officers that they would be held personally liable for any irregular expenditure. Treasury has followed the November circular with reminders by the CS that tough times lie ahead. Now, implications of cuts proposed by the circular in November would have meant that foreign travel by government officials would be minimized, as would be government events and conferences in hotels. But as a common parlance in Kenya goes, vitu kwa ground ni tofauti. Not long ago, and not long after the circular, the entire cabinet trooped to a 5-star hotel on the slopes of Mount Kenya for a retreat. This notwithstanding the fact that government has a choice of conferencing facilities that include the modern Kenya School of Government, KSG, right here in Nairobi, the seat and capital of Kenya. The retreat made for bad optics for a government that wanted to cut spending to the tune of 300 billion shillings. Talk of austerity in Kenya is not new. Every episode of economic hardship has always been greeted by that promise of cutting government wastage. But the reality is, it never quite happens, especially in the higher ranks of government. While lower ranks can actually lose small benefits like newspapers, bottled water, or even tea and snacks, there is little evidence that things at the higher ranks ever change. When former President Uhuru Kenyatta was Treasury Minister, for example, he introduced measures to cut down on fuel guzzlers by introducing the fuel-efficient Passat Volkswagen saloon car as the new means of transport for ministers. The Passat is today a symbol of a failed promise, reduced to something of a ceremonial car used during presentation of the budget speech at Parliament. As an austerity measure, the saloon car option failed flat as government officials quickly restored top-of-the-range fuel-guzzling SUVs to the road. And as if to mock austerity measures, Treasury this week indicated that it had increased the Office of the President budget from 5.8 billion shillings to 13.8 billion shillings, a sharp hike of the budget by nearly 60%. Whatever the justification for this increment in the middle of tough times, in the government's own words, the message is clear. Austerity measures remain more talk than action. And in another confounding step, the Public Service Commission has shortlisted some 240 Kenyans for the contentious position of Chief Administrative Secretary, CAS. Now, there are many unknowns about the position of CAS, from its legality to its role. There are 1,001 questions about the position of CAS. But one thing is assured, the position of CAS costs money, and not small money. The appointee will work straight against the spirit of that Treasury Circular number 11 of 2022 that rationalizes spending by reducing or eliminating non-core spending. Other than one more top-level appointee at each ministry, at the minimum, or even department, there are additional costs attached to the position of CAS. This includes procurement of new additional cars, and may even include a chase car, deployment of extra security personnel, office space and staff, among others. At this rate, austerity will remain just about talk and less about the work Kenya desperately needs right now. That is my kicker.
There's an old television show called 1,000 Ways to Die. If you don't know it, let me give you a quick synopsis. Now, it's characterized as a dark comedy or dark humor type of show. Now, it ran for 4 seasons from 2008. Now, it details supposedly true stories of how people met their death in the most unorthodox ways. Now, it may have served as entertainment for some, but was reality for others. Sadly, it may be reality for many Kenyan small business owners. You see, we promulgated the Constitution of Kenya in 2010, one of the key pillars of which was devolution. Devolve services to the counties, they said. Give people the mandate over their own lives at the grassroots, they said. Devolution will develop the counties and mashinani, they said. People don't have to be in the capital, Nairobi, they said. Go do business in the counties, they said. It will be good for you, they said. Well, they lied. Just yesterday, the Gusii Contractors Association urged the governor to pay the monies owed to them, said they're now living in poverty. A company in Mandera County is still owed 27 million shillings by the county government for building a wall at the GK prison there. Now get this, they've been chasing that payment for 7 years. Some company directors have since died. I mean, 7 years is a long time after all. Now, that's not all. At least 30 contractors and suppliers in Turkana County are demanding 500 million shillings owed to them for services rendered to the county. Meanwhile, some suppliers in Murang'a County resorted to street demos to highlight their plight. If you go to Kitui County, 2.4 billion shillings is owed to persons who've done business with the county government. Folks, I could be here all night recounting the exact same tales from each of the 47 counties. These are stories of many Kenyans that they can personally relate to. This is their life. You see, when we report that counties have pending bills of up to 158 billion shillings, I don't want you to just shake your head in disbelief and then move on. I want you to think for a moment that this money is owed to real people, many of them small business persons, who probably had to get a bank to finance their LPO once they got the contract. People who have waited 7 years for payment died while waiting. People who borrowed some of the money to meet the requirements for the tender. They borrowed money to purchase materials for the work to be done. People who have other employees who look up to them. Possibly, they employed a few more to take on the volume of work from the tender. And what have they been told? Promise after promise, from the previous regime to the present. Each county governor coming in saying, oh, they have to conduct a fresh audit to determine how much they really owe these Kenyans who've already done the work. In fact, you remember June 1st, 2019, when then President Kenyatta ordered all pending bills be settled by the end of that month? Speaking during the Madaraka Day celebrations in Narok that year, he ordered National Treasury to ensure that all payments owed by national government are sorted and urged the same of county governments. 3 years later, still nothing. Instead, what are people told? Oh, we are conducting an audit. Oh, we're waiting for the national government to send us money. Oh, controller of budget. All this after goods and services were rendered? Guys, this is unacceptable. And these are people's lives we're playing with. We cannot be that country that has, since Kibaki's administration, been talking big about the SME sector. Oh, it is the key to employment. It is the driver of Kenya's economy. It is the fulcrum of the recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. And yet we don't pay them what we owe them? Oh, buy Kenya, build Kenya, we say. Instead, they have to run street protests, bribe, beg, and do whatever it takes to get paid. Why do we do this to our people? Now, President Ruto in October last year promised to sort this out once and for all. We understand that they're hiring a transaction advisor on the securitization of the outstanding bills so as to pay the 700 billion they owe. Well and good. My hope is that this will not be a hollow promise, as the many others we have seen before. That's my take tonight.
My memo tonight starts at Ilbisil Primary School in Kajiado County. For many children, this school lunch is the only meal they will have today. This school and others across the country have recorded an increase in the number of students who come to the school daily because of the much-needed meal being offered. As the drought and hunger continue to bite, desperate parents are now joining their children in the queue for school lunch, as they too are left with no other option to deal with the biting hunger. The school administration says these parents have been queuing behind their children since schools opened in January. Some of these parents say they had stayed for days without food and had no option but to rush to school to partake in the much-needed meal, the only one they will have in a day. The school says most of these parents have been unable to pay fees as their livestock perished a long time back. Now, in Wajir, residents spoke of how they are forced to boil trees to quench their thirst and hunger. Sometimes even that water is not available. They are left languishing in the biting, relentless, scorching sun. Now, this situation is replicated in many parts of this country, with over 5 million people in dire need. This state of affairs may worsen, as reports indicate that below normal rainfall is expected during the rainy season over the next 3 months. These projections spelling doom for farmers who are ready to start planting but unable to do so. The suffering of millions of Kenyans is shameful to us as a country. Our leaders should not be comfortably and normally living their lives, sleeping soundly at night, having all their meals on time, moving around in big vehicles, traveling when and where they want to, and wrangling over who will lead what in Parliament, while the people who elected them languish and die. It should bother us when we see such pictures of despair and hopelessness in the eyes of fellow citizens of this country. This is a cycle that repeats itself ever so often and should not come as a surprise. Though the current situation is worst that the country has seen in a long time. 5 seasons and counting with little or no rainfall is making things unbearable for many. The relief food that most of the people depend on is never enough and does not reach everyone who desperately needs it. Some counties have even declared drought as an emergency, as the state of affairs becomes overwhelming for many to handle. Authorities need to take quick and urgent action. Projections already show that things are not getting better anytime soon. As a country, we would rather shelve development projects, reduce meetings and symposiums, as well as fact-finding missions abroad, and use that money to feed our people. A basic meal is a right. And the fact that over 5 million people are unable to get this basic need is sad and shameful to all of us. People have been stripped of their dignity as they find themselves in circumstances beyond their control. Time is of essence here, and every day that passes is a day lost. The authorities must contend with the reality that this is a race against time itself, and lives are at stake. That is my memo.
Well, this week in the Senate, something strange and unusual happened. It was the first time in my many years of covering and following proceedings in the Senate to see it happen. There were primary school children from Kirinyaga and Murang'a counties who were seated at the Speaker's gallery following proceedings in the August House yesterday. I'm sure they were looking forward to the trip to witness firsthand what the honorable senators do in Nairobi. Unfortunately, the Wednesday afternoon sitting was not exactly what we would want our children treated to. The senators were in a foul mood, brawling over the changes in the minority team announced a week ago during a parliamentary group meeting attended by Azimio leader Raila Odinga. The key issue being the removal of Isiolo Senator Fatma Dulo from the lucrative Senate minority whip position. To avoid the embarrassment of primary school pupils watching a dishonorable quarrel between majority and minority senators, the sergeant-at-arms had to escort the children out of the Senate building. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what really worried me. I was perturbed because even in the Roman Empire, where the Senate concept originated, a Senate is a house that would comprise the elders and therefore was considered wiser and more experienced members of the society or the ruling class. But there was nothing wise or experienced in the shouting contest we all witnessed yesterday in the afternoon. That is why I was deeply disturbed. In developed democracies, the Senate has the duty of holding the country together in times of crisis. This is because its members are expected to be more experienced, thoughtful, and well-grounded. And the Senate is not a place of noise. Wise people don't make noise. They reason together. They agree to disagree with decorum and order. For the record, let me say I have a soft spot for the Senate. Over the years, I have found debates in the Senate mature, thought-provoking, analytical, and even with some historical context. The profile of the Senate in the 11th and 12th parliaments has given flashes of maturity and experience. We cannot accuse the Senate of lacking in quality in the last 10 years. The quality of debate in the Senate has been markedly different from the discourse in the National Assembly. We must give credit where it is due. The Senate has often oozed experience and class. The last 2 Senates have produced men and women of high caliber. I'm talking about the likes of Moses Wetangula, James Orengo, Amos Wako, Mutahi Kagwe, Kipchumba Murkomen, Professor Kithure Kindiki, to mention but a few. Even the current majority leader, Aaron Cheriot, has acquitted himself well in the last 2 houses. The 13th Senate has equally good quality lawmakers, but the Wednesday afternoon events no doubt left a bitter taste in the mouth. The quality of the Senate has often been reflected in the calmness and restraint of the speakers. David Ekwe-Ethuro and Ken Lusaka guided the House despite the many challenges in their tenure. Today, Looking at the Wednesday afternoon situation, we remember the two speakers for their warm demeanor. They wore their robes well. They fitted well in those honored clothes. I'm not sure I can say the same about the current speaker, but maybe time will acquit him. What am I saying? The Senate has often insisted that it was the upper house. The events yesterday, that brawl over the minority leadership, shows nothing upper in the Senate. It was actually a low moment. The street-like brawl smelt of dishonor and disgrace. And even the senators themselves conceded yesterday afternoon when some sense prevailed. The conduct around the dispatch box yesterday in the Senate and this week has been way below the standards of an upper house. That notwithstanding, I remain a big fan of the Senate. I hope maseneta hawatatuangusha tena. Having misbehaved very early in their term, I hope they will recollect themselves and truly be the upper house that the Senate ought to be. That's my punchline.
It's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
Good stuff, guys.
Pending bills.
And spot on Senate.
It was disappointing.
Kids had
That
to be
thing
moved
yesterday
out of
was,
the
Imagine.
public gallery.
Do you know
Yeah.
how excited those children normally are
To
when
be,
they come
right?
to visit the Senate?
Wewe mwenyewe unakumbuka mkipelekwa bunge how happy you used to be.
Sisi hatukuwahi
Hamkupelekwa?
Nairobi primary school. We never came.
Hata high
Mimi
school.
nimeonea Senate na bunge Nairobi.
As a journalist.
As a
So can you
journalist.
imagine
So,
what it was
Really
like
end
then for
Yeah.
those kids if many of us didn't get the opportunity to
you can imagine.
Yeah.
And for such a trip, normally, the kids prepare for like
I know.
weeks and months.
We're going to Nairobi.
Looking forward.
Going to-
Then you come and see senators quarreling each other.
But in all fairness, haven't they seen that on television already?
True.
Yeah, but on a live is a
You don't
different.
tofauti.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But pending bills is a serious matter.
No, it is.
Madaraka Day 2019.
Yeah, 19. Yeah. You remember we
We were with Linas
Yeah.
in Narok
Yes,
Stadium.
that's right.
The president then said Zilipwe by end of
That
June.
month, yeah.
Wapi. Wapi. And there are guys who have died.
Yeah.
Waiting
Do
to
that
be
thing
paid.
they do in Central? Yeah.
That's it. But it's really serious, man. People
Thanks.
are suffering out here, and it's
And ordinarily,
not fair.
when the government buys something, it doesn't do it haphazardly. It is not. It is not. What do you call the
Impulse buying.
Impulse
No,
buying.
yeah.
It's not. It is budgeted for.
Yeah.
Resources are provided for in a budget.
They do
line.
an open tender
Yeah.
where they invite several people to come in and
The
bid.
government will never buy papers
Yeah.
if it has not budgeted for them.
Yeah.
So that people provided stuff, supplied, and have not been paid is not a good thing.
And then
But I see, and I'll make this point very quickly because maybe we are not going to revisit this pending bills issue. The problem with government business is it's seen as a favor to the suppliers.
yeah,
Now, if you are well connected, sometimes it's so well fast-tracked,
yeah.
you are not in the list of that pending bills, you will not face that problem. But if, depending on how you are viewed by those who are supposed to pay the bills, you can be delayed. They can keep it and, take you through all the 14 stations of the cross.
Yeah.
You remember the current governor of Nairobi when he was a member of the National Assembly? You remember that law on giving a percentage of government business to young people? Imagine there are some young people who took a loan
yeah.
of 100,000, supplied stuff.
Yeah.
They haven't been
Still
paid.
waiting.
Yeah,
Now you tell them,
Yeah.
Itown iko sawa.
yeah. And then you tell
Okay,
them, no,
town
wait,
iko sawa.
we're auditing. We have to conduct an audit. We have to make sure. Big fancy words. Let me tell you, if you've ever chased payment, it is the most humiliating thing you can ever do. You call, you beg, you text, you're told the guy who signs the checks is not there. It's such a humiliating exercise, but yet when you are doing the work, you are required to do things within stipulated timelines. If you don't do it, there's such drama that you get, from the one you are giving the service to. And let me tell you, that anyone who's chased a payment will know it is the most humiliating thing you can ever experience. Bana. Yani, let me tell you, you call, you text, people don't pick your calls. It's just no.
And then you have to pay a certain amount for your money to be.
Yes, exactly. Toaka kitu and then we.
Oh my God. Service. Sometimes that's why people prefer. I'm not saying the private sector is perfect, but at least uko kidogo.
Yeah. Or this is why we encourage corruption. I will bribe to now get my payment, which is just, I mean, it's ridiculous. Anyway, we could talk about the issue of pending bills for a long time, but I just don't want us to be desensitized by the big numbers and forget that there are people behind those big numbers. Thank you for watching. As always, thank you for the feedback. We see you again next week. Is next week a new month?
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, mumesema yes. Munangojea payday.
Hi, Bashir.
It will be 2nd March.
It'll be 2nd of March.
2nd of March.
Oh, it's my
anniversary of the murder of J.M. Kariuki.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's also my birthday month.
1975 it will be.
Yeah, it's also my birthday month.
Okay.
And that's, that's important. Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Don't forget. Asante. Good night, everybody. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.